Services continues to receive an influx of complaints from bank customers who still fall victim to phishing and card-not-present fraud. What is mostly concerning is that the people mostly targeted appear to be the elderly or vulnerable consumers who are defrauded of their pension monies or the loan amounts they received from their banks before they could receive the benefit of the loaned amounts. For more, we're joined by Reana Steyn, who's the CEO of the Ombudsman for Banking Services. Reana, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Good afternoon, and welcome.
So, I read in the intro phishing spelled with a V, and I'm sure most of our viewers are used to hearing phishing, which is, the PH spelling. What's the difference between the two?
Okay, so phishing, that we all know the term by now, that is when it's on emails. So you receive an email or you click on a link and it looks like exactly the bank's link. It looks like the website of your bank. So phishing is emails, and vishing, I think the V, it comes from voice scams and voice fraud, and that's how they came up with the V, vishing. That's telephonic scams, people phoning you, and the scam is all over the telephone. And I think we can get into that in more detail.
All right, so before we do that, when did you start receiving this influx of complaints? Did it start last year, or is it a recent development?
Well, we've seen it over the last 2-3 years. Last year we did see quite a bit of it. But it's suddenly in the last, I would say in the last 2-3 months, that across the board, all my adjudicators who each has a portfolio of files are reporting that they're seeing more and more of it. So it seems that this is now the preferred, sort of method that the fraudsters are using. And we've just suddenly seen an influx, which is why we're trying to warn consumers now.
Right. We often talk about privacy and, personal information that we share on social media. But what are some of the fraudsters doing in that space?
Well, some of the things that they could be doing is because it starts with what people refer to as social engineering. So social engineering is just using information that's available on social media or any other place, and using that information to get a foot in the door when they start talking to you. So some of it is, for example, having some fun competition that maybe amongst you and your friends, but somebody else, can maybe see if you don't have those privacy settings, saying what's your favorite colors, what was your first car, your dog's name, your child's birthday, all sorts of things. And they use that information to, when they have this conversation with you, to trick you into believing that they are who they say they are. And because they know this information, obviously then they must be who they say they are. It's also why people also think they receive a phone call. The person says, the scamster says he's from the bank. And because he knows your ID number possibly and an address, and he's got your phone number, obviously he's phoning you, people believe it must be the bank, because why would this person otherwise have my ID and my address? But that kind of information is everywhere. It's somewhere where you fill in a form. It is really everywhere these days, so they can get hold of that. But people don't realize that the person gives you an ID number, an address, and a telephone number is not necessarily from the bank.
Reana, talk to me about some of the work you're doing as the Ombudsman for Banking Services to work with the other banks, as well as perhaps in the space of social grants, where some of the elderly and vulnerable may fall victim to some of the tricks you've just pointed out.
So what we do at the Ombudsman for Banking Services is we assist consumers with complaints against the banks. It's against all the banks. It's a free of service, it's completely free of charge, the service. And it is a case that where a consumer has an issue with the bank, and it can be anything, absolutely anything. You try and resolve it with the bank, and of course, if there's no happiness, you can come to our office, and I've got a team of trained lawyers who can look at the matter, ask the bank for all the information, all the documentary evidence, your contract, your statements of account, system logs, all sorts of information. And then we look at both sides of the story. We're not consumer advocates. They're supposed to be, sort of introduce fairness into the process and an independent view. So some consumers are upset because we don't take their side against the bank, but we're there to actually investigate the case, get to the bottom of the facts, and then we will make a ruling. We will make a recommendation in favor of the bank, or we will make a recommendation in favor of the consumer, in which case the bank has to comply with what we tell them to do. So, and a lot of the cases that we see does involve fraud, and it's very, very sad, and it's very sometimes heartbreaking. We've recently seen a case where a pensioner lost 1.4 million to scamsters. We just gave out all his banking information, and they defrauded him. Now, in those cases, the people want the money back from the bank. But of course, it's not the bank's fault if you're a victim of a crime, of a fraud, and you've given out all your information to allow them to do banking on your account. But we see a lot of fraud, still even at the ATMs. And then, of course, we also see other queries. We see contractual issues, whether it is somebody not understanding the interest that's charged, the length of the period of their contract that they're querying, extensions, even in this COVID period, the assistance that they received and should have received. So we will receive any kind of query and we will deal with that.
Some of these scams can be so convincing, I can imagine, especially for those who, believe the voice, believe the information that they're getting on the other end. What sort of tips can you provide for our viewers in order for them to be even more skeptical of these calls?
Yeah, so I think the big danger point is that in many cases, it is a person saying they're phoning from the bank. In many instances, they say that there's fraud being committed as we speak on your account, and you just need to give them certain OTPs and PINs and account numbers, and then they will stop the fraud. They will tell consumers to do certain transactions. The consumer believes he's trying to stop the transaction, the fraudulent transaction, but he's actually performing the transaction. So people must read the OTPs, the information of what's happening, like linking an account, paying so-and-so. That is often in the OTP information. But people are so rattled and they're scared, and the fraudsters put pressure on them to do it quickly, urgently, quickly do this, quickly do that, that they fall for that. So whenever you receive a phone call like that, rather say, I understand the urgency, but let me rather phone my bank. Very important, do not phone back the number they give you. They will often give you all sorts of information that makes it seem like they're legitimate. They'll say, here's my landline, here's my cell phone number, here's your reference number. It sounds all very legitimate. Do not fall for it. Do not phone that number. It's the fraudster's number. Phone the bank. Phone your bank, your branch, your personal banker. They will know what's going on. If they ask you for your OTP, definitely it's not the bank. If they ask you for your password and PIN, it is not the bank. The banks, I have been saying for years now that they will never ask that kind of information. But unfortunately, especially vulnerable consumers, elderly people, people who, maybe not familiar with online banking, they fall for it. The fraudsters download your banking app. They ask you for your ID, for your even photographs of your ID and your water and lights account. People send it to the fraudster, and then the fraudster open an account and transact on your account, taking all your money. So there's various things that happen at the moment. Also, I think maybe just one other thing that I can mention, there are fraudsters out there at certain service providers, somewhere where you've got an account. Where you have an account, those people have your ID, they have your address, they have your telephone number. If there's a fraudster working in that organization, they can phone you and they've got all this information, and then they can tell you, you've got an account of so-and-so, there's a problem here, I'm going to send you some information, give me the OTP. The minute you hear that kind of information or request, be aware, do not ever give that. Rather phone your bank. But as I say, the scary part is they put so much pressure, because that's, I think, part of the trick. Do it quickly, immediately, urgently. Something is going to happen to all your money. And that's when people fall for it.
Reana, if unfortunately you did fall victim, say probably today or in the past week, is there anything that consumers can do? I mean, or is it too late?
Well, I think the one thing, the minute you realize, sometimes we often hear that consumers realize the minute they put down the phone, they have like second thoughts. And then they think, well, maybe that wasn't true. And then they phone their bank realizing it was fraud. The minute you realize it was fraud, phone your bank. Make sure you tell them that fraud occurred, that you were a victim of fraud. Because what they can do is they can then immediately stop whatever is happening on your account. They can also inform the beneficiary bank to stop whatever transactions are still in the process. If, of course, it's a week later, the money will be gone. There's nothing anybody can do. But very often, if the report is made very quickly and soon after the fraud, we can still help consumers, and the bank can help them recover some money if it's not already withdrawn. If it's still sitting in the fraudster's account, for example, we will be able to get that money back. If the money is withdrawn out, cash at the ATM, it's gone. We can't help, but report it as soon as possible.
Right. Reana, thank you so much for your time. That is Reana Steyn, who is the CEO of the Ombudsman for Banking Services. It's time to say goodbye to our SABC3 viewers. We'll be back with more.